This is the interface to our IT labs. The labs are virtual machine based. There could be multiple virtual machines in a lab running Windows Server or Linux, or a combination of the two. The interface has two panes. The left pane is the content pane. This is where we provide an introduction to the lab, as well as learning objectives, the devices that are used in the lab, and the set of tasks that the students are expected to complete in the lab. The content pane is also where we provide step-by-step instructions for each lab. The right pane is the device pane, and this is where the student interacts with the virtual machines. Each chapter has at least one lab. This particular lab corresponds to a chapter on network security in the book. In this lab, students learn how to configure a VPN server and a VPN client. So I'm going to start the lab by just going to the next page. We provide step-by-step instructions for each lab. Our labs are auto-graded. So as the students complete the tasks in the lab at various stages of the lab, we auto-grade the tasks. And each task might be several steps. So for example, here, the first task is to install the remote access role in Windows Server. And the first step in this task is to connect to VMs. I've completed some of the steps in the lab. So I've already installed the role of remote access. And these are the steps that are graded. For example, in this case, the starting server manager corresponds to receiving 1 point. There are about 15 or 16 steps to install remote access. And since the role was installed successfully, the student receives that 1 point as well. To show you auto grading, I'm going to complete the final step of configuring a VPN on this server. And we see that that step was auto-graded. The second task in the lab is to configure routing remote access for VPN service. We're doing a custom configuration for VPN access. And then we start the service. And this is also auto-graded. If you're familiar with zyBooks, these are participation activities. And these results are recorded in the gradebook. So the instructor has access to each student's performance in the lab. So the instructor knows exactly which steps were completed and which steps were not. The third task in this lab is to create a security group and add some users to that group. I'm going to show you these steps, but I'm not going to complete any of them for the sake of time. In this task, we create a user group called Engineering VPN. We create some users. We add those users to the Engineering VPN group. The fourth task in the lab is to create a network policy, NPS, so network policy server, for our VPN connections. Again, we provide step-by-step instructions. An important step of this policy is to configure the authentication methods. And the final step of this lab is to configure the VPN client. That is done on the second VM. So I'm just going to switch to the second Windows server here. That involves configuring a VPN user. And once the VPN client is created, we ask the student to connect to the VPN server. And we ask the student also to switch back to the VPN server and view that connection and some network statistics that are displayed on the VPN server. And that would be the end of this lab.